Hello listeners, this talk is partly a response to other people, but I would also like to draw some broader themes from this talk, so it's not strictly a response video. I'm sure many of you have been wondering about my thoughts on the particular incident that I'm going to discuss in the first part of this talk, but those thoughts have been encapsulated by a comment under one of my talks by someone called Cultured Thug 2. And he said, "All I want for Christmas is a reactionary expat video about Sargon of Akkad's appearance on Millennial Woes' Google Hangout." And he provided a little smiley face at the end, so I think he's probably, if he's listening now, he probably has his popcorn out already. I'm not going to respond to any of Sargon's specific points that were made during that hangout. The hangout was several hours long. You can go back and listen to it, or listen to it for the first time if you haven't already listened to it. But there were many other people in that hangout. I made a few points myself, but there were many other people in that hangout who made all sorts of points for hours. There were at least 9 other people. I know some other people came and went, so it could have been up to 20 of us over the time frame. But nevertheless, there were many people who made all sorts of points, and I think those points sort of speak for themselves. So go back and look at that hangout if necessary. What I'm going to discuss in this talk is the ways in which various people behaved during the hangout, and also some of the broader themes that I think can be drawn from it. So firstly, I can understand why Millennial Woes wanted Sargon of Akkad to be there. He does have a large subscriber base, and so it was a very good opportunity to expose people who are not already on the alt-right to the ideas of the alt-right. And Millennial Woes seems to have been vindicated in that by the fact that there have been several comments. Certainly beneath that first talk, I haven't looked at the others yet. And many people stated that they had then subscribed to Millennial Woes' channel, or that the ideas were interesting, or that they didn't think Sargon of Akkad gave people their fair go, and so on and so forth. So it does seem as though the strategy that Millennial Woes followed was a good one. That said, I think Sargon was trolling. He clearly came in with an agenda to label us Nazis, though, of course, he didn't say it. The way this is always done is someone doesn't say, "I think you're a Nazi." What they say is, "Well, some people might consider you Nazis." And so they always do it through a third person, or group of third people, if you like. But it seems to me that was his agenda. It took him hours to finally get around to it, but it seems like that's what it was. And I think he could have got to that point very, very quickly, certainly within the first 20 minutes, if not the first 2 minutes. Instead, he managed to derail the entire hangout for hours. Now, as I've just said, nevertheless, Millennial Woes managed to get a lot of subscribers and positive comments and so on from that. So I don't think Sargon was really that successful in derailing the hangout as such, and there have been and will be several other hangouts. So, people got to say other things elsewhere at other times. But nevertheless, I do think he was trolling, and I want to make clear here, it's not really his ideology that I found a problem. I mean, at some level, I do believe that leftists are trolls and have been trolling Western civilization for decades, if not centuries. But nevertheless, I'm not so much annoyed by liberalism. What really frustrated me in that hangout was his rudeness to everyone who was there. And there were many things that he did that I think were rude. He constantly cut people off He didn't let people finish their points. He constantly said that he was interested in people's ideas. So he tried to make people think that he was engaging them in good faith. And then, they went through a whole process of explaining a particular point, and then he just brushed those ideas off in various ways. And at some points he actually said that he wasn't actually interested in people's ideas, having just, 2 minutes before said he was interested in their ideas. That's not arguing in good faith. That's not treating people as though they are ends rather than means. He tried to make the entire thing about him, and it was very difficult, if not impossible, for other people to have a separate conversation. It was always Sargon with person A or Sargon with person B. It was never person A with person B as such. And of course, the thing that really set me off and caused me to start screaming and swearing at him was that he engaged in multiple ad hominems to us. How did he think we were going to respond to that? Basically, I just think that he was rude. I think other people in the Hangout were too polite to call him on it. Though it's interesting to note that Seventh Son figured this out pretty quickly, and he also had words for him. Seventh Son didn't come into the Hangout until Sargon had already been there for several hours. But Seventh Son figured this out pretty quickly, and I think Seventh Son has a lot of experience dealing with this kind of stuff, and he's also very confident and very articulate and so on. And so he seemed to have no qualms about calling Sargon out on this either. However, many people are not that articulate. They're not that confident. They're not that willing to sort of confront someone. They're just not used to that, whether it's because of their own personality or they don't have the experience or whatever it is. They find that very intimidating. And of course, for someone who is willing to transgress social norms, to some extent, they can get away with it because other people won't be confident enough to call them on it, or other people will still engage them in good faith. I think that was just rude, basically, for Sargon to do that to those people. That's not to say those people were unintelligent. They weren't unintelligent, but for whatever reason, many of them weren't willing to do what I did. And really, this is why I don't engage liberals anymore. There are some liberals, of course, who are willing to engage you in an honest discussion in good faith and so on. But very few, particularly when there are other people around. On a one-on-one basis, they can or will. But when they have an audience, they're very concerned about signaling. And so at some point they will have to engage in snark, they will have to be dismissive, they will have to play all these funny little games like saying, well, provide me some evidence. So you provide them with an argument or some facts, statistics or whatever, and they'll say, yeah, but provide me with some more. So you provide them with some more. And, after you've provided them with 357 points and you can't provide the 358th, they say, gotcha, right? So they play all these funny little games with you. Some people are aware of these tricks more than others. Some people are not. They're inexperienced in this way. I've had lots of experience with this nonsense from liberals, and I just don't want to deal with it anymore because they're not arguing in good faith. I also think that we don't need to go out to them, or we don't need to engage them. Now, that's a very separate thing from saying we have to turn them away, but we don't have to proselytize in a way. I think these people, many people on the left, have already been or will be red-pilled very soon because of events that have transpired and seem to be accelerating. Many people are being red-pilled on a daily basis. We have lots of people already within the movement who only a month ago, 3 months ago, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever, were liberals. And they were red-pilled by reality. I think that all we have to do is have our own arguments already there, have our own positions already there, have our own culture already there, and so on and so forth, institutions, the whole lot, and just say, well, here's all this stuff. Come to us when you're ready, and we'll welcome you in. But we're not going to go out there and sort of try to do combat with people. We're not going to go out there and try to proselytize or anything like that. I tend to think that that is a huge waste of time and energy at some level. Though, as I mentioned earlier, it seems to have been somewhat successful for Millennial Woes. But I think the really important thing is that can be really demoralising for a lot of people on the alt-right, especially if they're doing it by themselves, because they can feel very isolated and they can feel as though people are not giving them a fair go and so on and so forth. I think one of the things that has been really good about these Hangouts, particularly the subsequent Hangouts, was there was a real feeling that people weren't alone anymore. They were surrounded by people who were like them. They weren't strange. They were normal. There were lots of other people just like them. And there was this feeling, it was palpable, of energy and togetherness and all of that sort of stuff. And it was really uplifting. It's been really a kind of transformative experience, I think, for a lot of people. And it's been a very positive thing. And I think that has been the greatest outcome of what Millennial Woes has done here. I think he's done an absolutely incredible job at this, both in getting a whole lot of ordinary people and also some quite interesting guests, and bringing all of these people together and allowing them to interact and feel normal and network and do all of this stuff. I think it's really necessary to do that stuff rather than us be the lone person dealing with all this snark and all this lack of good faith and all of this stuff that can really make us feel quite low, particularly for people who are not that confident to begin with. I'm someone who can just brush it off. I'm someone who can just dish it right back out of them and say, look, you're an idiot, get lost, right? As evidenced by that Hangout. But many people cannot, and it can really wear them down. I think we just need to do our own thing, and people will come to us. If we build it, they will come. But as I said, I understand why Millennial Woes let him be there. Personally, if it had been me, I probably would have just warned him and kicked him very quickly. Now, as for my own response to him, for those of you who have not already listened, I started swearing at him. I started screaming at him at several points throughout the Hangout. I'm not sure if I actually called him a troll. I think I called him a snake or something at one point as well. Because he had been dismissing people, and then he said something along the lines of people who are not very bright or something like that. And that just set me off. I think that anger is a legitimate response to people. I think it's a legitimate emotion. I mean, it's a bit silly to say that emotions aren't legitimate in a way. Why would we have that ability to be angry or happy or sad or scared or confused or anything else? There seems to be some sort of reason why we have those things. And it seems to me that anger serves a few purposes. One is to just tell people to back off if they're playing funny games with you. You know, if you've ever approached a dog and the dog has responded in certain ways, if you're attuned to those things, so the hair on the back of its neck stands up, it gives you side eye, where it kind of shows you the white of its eye, and then it bares its teeth and so on. That's basically the dog saying, I'm not comfortable with you getting in my face, back off. Then if you do something more to the dog, it will bite you. But it warned you along the way. Anger is a way of warning people to just back off, basically. I think it's also a way of, or in particular, I think it's a way of saying, don't threaten me, but also don't threaten those around me. Don't threaten those within my group. And it's a way of expressing in-group loyalty. As I said earlier, many people may have been too polite, or they may have lacked the confidence to basically call him on his nonsense. Someone had to. I was willing to be the bad person, in a sense, the guy who lost control or whatever. to just say, back off. Stop screwing with the other people here who may not have the confidence to call you on your nonsense. You're obviously more domineering than them. Back off. Let them have their say. I wasn't just going to sit back and let that happen and let him do what he did to them. And I think also that once I did that, it sort of broke a barrier of sorts, and it made it more acceptable or easier for other people to start calling him out. They didn't quite call him out the way I did, other than Seventh Son, but it made it easier, I think, for other people to start calling him out. Now, that's enough about him specifically. I want to broaden this a little bit, because I think that that episode was actually really indicative of a lot of other things. It was really a microcosm of what I believe is happening in society at the moment, and has been happening for a few years. Many people who are not on the alt-right, and of course there are many different subsections of the alt-right, and not everyone agrees on the alt-right, but many people who don't consider themselves somewhere on the alt-right, whether those are conservatives or whether those are people who consider themselves to be on the left, they wonder why the alt-right is growing. They wonder why there are all these online communities, why message boards are flooded with people trolling, why there are entire fora or channels or whatever just full of these people, these little echo chambers or whatever you want to call them. They wonder why people like Donald Trump or Marine Le Pen or various other figureheads, if you like, are becoming increasingly popular. There's a very simple response to this. It's because there are large numbers of people, particularly young white men, who now feel increasingly disenfranchised, if not completely disenfranchised. And they feel that on many levels. They feel that in terms of culture, they feel that in terms of sex or gender relations, they feel that on economic issues, as though there are no good economic opportunities for them. They feel that in education, across a whole range of issues, they feel as though they have been or are being disenfranchised. They feel that the so-called elite have open disdain for them. Open disdain. They're not just dismissive, though they are of course dismissive, but that they have open disdain for them. They're sick of these people telling them what's good for them, when they can see the truth with their own eyes. They're sick of the condescending tone. They're sick of being shut out. They're sick of being called names. They're sick of being demonized. All the rest of it. They're just fed up for not acquiescing to all of this that they are experiencing, that all of this that they feel is being crammed down their throats on a daily basis. They're sick of seeing everything from their nations, their cultures, their local communities, even them as individuals, being constantly mocked, undermined, and destroyed by their so-called betters. Many of these people, we've got past that whole phase of history where white people want to go and conquer the world. Many of the millennials out there on the alt-right, they don't have dreams of empire and having their own personal coolie and all of this stuff. They don't have that. All they want is to be left alone. They want their nations to be left alone. And I say this as someone who is not an ethno-nationalist. I have great sympathies for them, but I'm not fully an ethno-nationalist. Indeed, in my own life, I'm married to an Asian woman and I have a child who is half Asian. So I'm not all race war now, 1488, all the rest of that. But I feel great sympathy for these people because they don't want their nations, their cultures, their local communities, them as individuals being destroyed. They just want to be left alone. They want to be treated like every other group of people out there. They don't, if anyone started doing what is being done to them in any other part of the world, it would be called colonialism or neo-colonialism. They don't want that. They just want to be left alone to do their own thing in their own houses, in their own businesses, in their own communities and countries and all the rest of it. That's all they want. And in one way or another, whether they're misguided or not, people like Donald Trump, people like Marine Le Pen, this whole online alt-right movement, all the rest of it is a break from that. They just are sick of it. They are, many of them are clutching at straws, many of them are not. But all of this has not emerged out of nowhere. And it's justified. Everyone needs to feel at some level like they are themselves, they can be themselves, they can have their identity, they can have their place in the world as individuals and as groups. And when they see all of these other people who are allowed to have those things, but they're not, of course they're not going to just roll over and accept that. Of course they're not going to sit down and abolish themselves, as that leftist slogan goes. Of course they're going to push back. I'm not a fan of democracy in many ways, and populism and all the rest of it. But at the same time, those who would truly consider themselves elite should understand that to be elite, to be noble, all the rest of it, however you want to describe it, means that you can't have open disdain for the so-called little people. That doesn't mean that you have to accept them as being the same as you, accept them as being on the same level as you, but you can't have open disdain for them. You can't, and you especially can't espouse all of this egalitarian, democratic set of ideals and say, well, yes, of course, you can have your vote, you can have your say, unless it's the wrong opinion. Vote again until you get it right. That's ridiculous. You can't do that. And look, I should say here that I'm not a religious person. I don't have any particular faith to which I adhere. But in my travels around the world, I have been to many different churches and so on. I've been to Catholic churches, Protestant churches, Orthodox churches. I've been to mosques. I've been to Hindu temples, Buddhist temples, various other Eastern temples, Confucian temples, Taoist temples, and so on. I'm not religious. I have not believed in that stuff when I've gone into those places. But I haven't waltzed in there and started calling people idiots. I've had the good manners to just stand to the side, stand at the back and observe, ask people politely if I could do something, or just watch what other people were doing. I haven't just waltzed in there like a bull in a china shop. That's bad manners. Now, whether it's Sargon of Akkad or people like Angela Merkel, people who think quite highly of themselves, they can't just expect to do this. They can't just expect to waltz in and start pushing the so-called little people around and not expect a reaction from them. And ironically, the more that they do that, the more that they will actually drive other people into the arms of the very people they claim to oppose. People like Donald Trump or Marine Le Pen or whomever, people on the alt-right, the large figures on the alt-right and so on. The more that they express their open disdain for the so-called little people, the more those little people, and also many other not so little people who are sitting on the fence and who will observe this and be disgusted by it, the more they will push all of those people over to the right. And in closing for this talk, if I could be so bold as to offer people on the left some advice, it would be this. If you truly want to engage people on the right and understand where they are coming from, but then really engage them on a humanistic level. Many people on the left consider themselves secular humanists. Well, practice what you preach. Treat them like humans. Treat them as ends rather than means. Because otherwise, what you're going to see in coming years and in coming decades is that there is going to be a lot more pushback. There already is pushback, but it's fairly low level, fairly tame stuff. But in coming years and decades, if you continue with this, the pushback is not going to be as friendly or nice as it currently is. You are going to create the very monster that you fear. So that's all I have to say on this matter. I hope this was informative, or I hope this answered what people have been thinking. Please respond in the comments. Thanks for listening.